Welcome to the podcast. To learn about key funding trends and market insight, the podcast is co-hosted by Connected International. Now, here's your host, Mike Shanley.
Hello, and welcome to the Global Strategy Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Shanley. Today, our guest is Monica Harris. Monica is a former senior IT acquisition advisor at DHS with 33 plus years of experience in the government, retired in November, so just a few months ago. Monica has participated in more than 100 technical evaluations, including as a contracting officer. Today, she's here on our show to share insight on what happens behind the scenes from the government side on the evaluation and award process, and what does it mean for your firm. Monica, thank you very much for being on the podcast today.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad I'm here. Nice to join you.
Thank you. First question, how has government contracting changed just in the last few months?
Ooh, that's a big question.
That's our 30-minute show. We'll be right there.
Yeah. So before the administration, there was a lot of external communication with industry. The industry were more of partners. You know, they helped us drive what our requirements are going to look like. You know, what our evaluation factors, what contract vehicles. We always had the reverse industry days, industry engagement, to help us, you know, as partners. And over the last, since January up until now, you know, there's kind of been a lockdown. You know, there is no travel allowed for most agencies, no speaker engagements, matter of fact, I think we're in week 2 or 3 that the acting DHS director sent a memo to USCIS saying, basically a nice way of saying cease and desist, no more external communications. So it's hard for industry right now to have any insight into what's going on internally within the government. You know, so that is the big change that industry is struggling now, is just lack of information, lack of insight.
How long do you anticipate that lasting? Do you think that's a couple months during this transition? Is that something that will likely be a policy for? I know it's hard to predict, but likely a policy for the next 4 years. But what do you see as you're reading the market?
If I had to guess, based on everything that has happened since January and now we're full well into April, I don't think it's a temporary thing. I also don't think it's a permanent, I don't want to say the word thing. I just don't think it's a permanent situation, but I definitely think that industry and the government kind of need to buckle down, that this is probably going to be a 18-month, another 18 months-ish. You know, normally during an administration change, if the administration coming in an administration has full control, which right now they do, this is not a political statement, these are just facts, then it is game on, a lot of changes, pushing the initiatives. And then usually around the midterm elections, there's 1 or 2 seats that they'll lose. And so they might lose control in the Senate or the House. And then changes slow down. You know, they're not as imminent as they have been lately. I mean, there's, you know, tons of changes every day. I wake up, you know, and I'm like, okay, did something happen on the weekend? Did something happen on Monday? You know, like Monday, for example, you know, DHS headquarters and CIS component, actually TSA as well, received their, it's called the fork in the road. That's not the right word, but that's what it's called by Congress, you know, what they're referring it to. Mm-hmm. Fork in the road. And then there's 2 early retirement incentives. Those were sent out on Monday. And by the way, you have to make the personnel have to make these life-altering decisions in 7 days. They don't have, you know, a choice to even think about it other than a week. And then imminently what's coming after is probably going to be, not probably, it's going to be the reduction in workforce. So a lot of changes coming down the pipe.
Given that disruption in the traditional government partnering sales industry engagement model, what are some indicators you do look at to get some insight in what direction the administration, whatever agency you're working with, is going?
I like to say follow the money, but some of these agencies aren't really funded appropriated. So I'll talk about CIS. They're not appropriated funding; they're fee funded, and so you can't, you know, really follow the money. But what you can do is you can look at their current portfolios to see what requirements are existing now, what would be like the recompetes, what would they be looking like? That's what I would do, is kind of go historically of what was happening, take into consideration all of the changes. So for example, if you're a consulting company and that's what you've been doing as your major business model, I wouldn't be looking for the consulting contracts to be recompeted. Matter of fact, a lot of the consulting contracts, have been terminated or de-scoped significantly over the last like 2 or 3 months. Anything that was doing, like, for example, under Biden and Obama, and I'm specifically talking about CIS, Citizen Immigration Services, it's we manage immigration. And so it was, how do we bring in immigration? How do we open the doors, lack of a better word? That's not happening now. So anything that had to do with customer base, customer initiatives, those are going to be cut. There was, when I was at an Office of Contracting, there was a complete division that changed their name and their mission. It was Customer Service Public Engagement. It was a directorate. And I actually worked there for a year, and that totally disappeared under the first Trump administration. And that was then changed to External Affairs. I don't know if the External Affairs is going to be an initiative, as an example for this administration as it stands today. Another thing, and I find this pretty interesting, I've said this a couple times and people look at me, like I have three heads, is, USA jobs. I know it sounds strange, but I look at it this way. There is a hiring freeze. So if there's a hiring freeze, you think, well, there's going to be no jobs posted. I just track it because I've just been a Fed for my entire life. And I find it interesting that USCIS has some postings for immigration officers. I'm like, oh, we have hundreds, if not thousands, of immigration officers. Why would we have, in this situation, why would there be jobs for that? And I kind of had to like pull the thread on that. Is an immigration officer, when they're hired, they are trained. It's called basics training. They go away for a month and they learn how to to become an immigration officer, the benefits, all of the forms in that. Well, they're not going to use the same immigration officers, Monica's opinion. They're not going to use the same immigration officers for what they're wanting to right now, which is basically halt immigration, not stop immigration, but halt it and double check, and make sure it's all about securing the border. It's all about vetting. So I understand now why they're hiring more immigration officers, because they're going to be doing a totally different job. Another thing too is I find it interesting that they're being hired under refugee asylum, immigration office, and their fraud and detection. Makes complete sense, given those are the two components that I believe will be impacted by the administration for CIS as far as, immigration. So yeah,
Well,
that, and I track, I go to sam.gov, APFS, which is for DHS, GovWin, any of those, HireGov. I track ones that are, I pick about five a week, and I pick them in different socioeconomic categories, small or anything SDB, a disadvantaged business. And I track the ones that are being canceled. That's an indicator. That's an indicator that, okay, it's no longer a priority. Therefore, that's either it's a new requirement or it's an existing requirement. So if I'm an industry and it's been canceled, I'm going to track it to see if it's reposted, because it might be, instead of it being 100 as in what it is currently now, maybe they're going to take that and put it into a 50% of that requirement is going to be along the recompete.
Well, I think that's, especially on the USA jobs, that's interesting. I think that's not a typical market intelligence source that
Yeah.
most BD or sales teams are looking at. And sure, if you're looking at whatever agency, sub-agency, department you're selling to, that's I think it's probably worth a look at USA jobs to see what are they hiring for and really getting into the scopes of those. So let's get into the nuances of the procurement process, starting with the evaluation. Could you talk about a bit about how the government, the internal conversation or process that happens to set that evaluation for a procurement?
Sure. Yes. It usually starts about 18 months before the contract is due to expire. And I will tell you, so in my role, my previous role at CIS, I had a lot of industry engagement. Reverse industry days, I was always wanting to hear what whatever I had recommended as an evaluation factor, did I really get what I was looking for? Was it a good evaluation factor? Did it produce an outcome, a decision outcome of picking a vendor? And so, one of the things that we start with is with the RFI. And I've heard this over and over, and I completely understand industry's perspective, is they'll respond to an RFI, they never hear anything back. So I kind of want to look at it as, think about it from the government's perspective. If we issue an RFI and we get 150 responses, if we respond to 50% of them, we're not able to move forward with the procurement strategy. So it is pretty common that there's not going to be feedback on the RFI. But that's where I would call the sausage making happens. Even if it's not asked in the RFI a specific question about a procurement strategy or an evaluation factor, always, always, always act like it is, I call it an elevator conversation. You happen to get in the elevator and you look around you and you're in there with the CIO. You've got 90 seconds before he gets off the floor. What do you want to tell him? What do you want to, what kind of impact do you want to make in that 90 seconds from the first floor to the fifth floor? That's how I would respond to these RFIs is one, answer the questions, and then two, provide any kind of insight into what would be the recommended evaluation factors, even if it's fitting specifically for the company who's responding. Because in the end, those are going to be compiled. They're going to be read. I don't care if there's 150, I don't care if there's 50. And if it becomes a trend or a common that that industry is stating, well, we really think you should use corporate experience as an evaluation factor, or we really think that you should include past performance, or maybe give a price range or something similar along those lines, it's taken into consideration because it just makes the government's job, number one, easier and smarter. And two, the government is contracting because the industry is smarter in these specialties than the government is. So we really take that feedback seriously. So that's number one, is respond to the RFIs, even if they don't ask, put in your recommended evaluation factors and even why. That helps drive the evaluation factors. And then another thing that drives the evaluation factors is, and I think this probably isn't commonly known within industry. So for example, if there's a best-in-class strategic source vehicle that DHS can use, and we use GSA Mass, could you imagine being in the government's shoes and receiving 150 responses? We would be in evaluation hell, and we would never get anything awarded. And so there's got to be a way to limit the competition enough to make it manageable. So under GSA Mass, anybody who's familiar with CIS or even other components, but I'll just talk specifically about CIS, we will say that immigration experience is preferred. Right then and there, it's pretty narrow. You've either have immigration services or you don't. Now, you can have it similarly, like CMS. Some of their systems can translate, lack of a better word, to the immigration services, our systems, our tech stack. But that's how some of the evaluation factors are determined, is really just to try to limit the time to evaluate all of these proposals.
One common, priority of industry is figuring out who are the right contacts inside government related to a procurement they're interested in. For the evaluations, do you find there's often the fingerprints of a certain contracting officer or other person that the industry might be able to read into to say, who really was behind framing this? Or how does actually the final evaluation criteria get set internally?
So yeah, it's interesting because industry can start to see a trend based on a contracting officer. So for example, his name is Monty. He's a contracting officer within USCIS. He's leading River, he's leading Rapid, him and his team. And you can see similarities in CO's evaluation factors, their writing, that kind of, common within I think anybody, that we kind of have our common, nuances, how we write and things like that. That's an indicator. And also too, the program office has the final say on what the technical evaluations are going to be. The contracting office is the business evaluator. They'll evaluate the past performance. They'll evaluate the pricing. They're not going to evaluate the tech. They're going to be in the room. They're going to listen to the orals. They're going to be there with the coding challenges. They're going to make sure that everybody sticks to the rules, that are in the that sections L and M. But they're not going to be the experts in that particular field. So the program office determines who's going to be the technical factors and who is going to be the technical evaluators. And usually it starts with like the division chief. That usually is an indicator of who is going to be on the technical panel, who has the expertise. They're pretty engaged with industry. I take it back. They're engaged with industry if you currently have a contract because they're managing, those contracts, whether it's specifically as an ITPM or a PM. But they might not be as visible to somebody who's not already in the agency, for example, CIS.
All right, moving on to the next phase of it. When the proposals have been submitted, what happens internally once you have those in hand during the evaluation and the award process?
So as soon as they're received, the contracting officer goes through and makes sure they're compliant. They're received on time, they followed the rules and regulations, checked every box, signed everything. Then what happens is the technical is a separate attachment. The technical proposals are sent over to the program office, only to the technical evaluators who have signed an NDA. Those are, I don't want to say back in the day when I worked at the Navy for 21 years, they literally at the time sequestered us. We literally went in a room, sequestered, they brought in our lunch, you'd have thought we were in court. They don't do that anymore, especially within the remote environment. But the technical panel members are the only ones that are allowed to see the proposals, and they evaluate them based on the evaluation factors. At the same time, the contracting officer is evaluating the price proposal. Once the technical evaluation has been signed and approved, there's a chair and several members, signing members, and then there's some subject matter experts that could just be advisors that don't sign the technical panel. Once each one of those have waded in and the chair has made a final decision of the evaluation factors, for example, whether somebody's going to be considered, excellent versus good or, low, whatever the evaluation factors are, that report is signed. Once that report is signed, it's sent over to the contracting office, and that's it. Program office doesn't hear another thing. The only thing that they will hear is who won. They are not allowed or invited to the pricing proposal. It's totally separate.
As the business development team, the proposal team are putting together the document, are there ways to structure it? Maybe just very explicitly aligning with the evaluation criteria, or is there anything that then has to go into an internal award memo? Any recommendations, even on just the formatting or presentation of the sales pitch, the data, the proposed solution architecture, in the proposal that you're sometimes maybe reading these as the evaluator, you're like, oh, why didn't they just structure it this way? Or it would be, it's so much nicer, it makes it easier for us to evaluate. What would share some insight on those thoughts in your head as you're reviewing these as the former evaluator that you just wish industry would have known in their proposal development?
Really good question. I can tell anybody out there in industry, just cut and paste the questions. Just don't make the government hunt and peck and look for it. If here's question 1 and here's your answer, here's question 2, there's the answer. A lot of times there is a page limit. Don't waste the 10-page page limit on 2 pages of telling me about your president or your vice president or how long you've been in business. Anything that's not really related and is fluff, I don't want to say we don't care, but it's funny because I'll get my proposal and I'll go, I get to page 3. Okay, now I've got page 3. This is where, they're answering the question. This is what's going to determine, what score I'm going to give them. Those first 2 pages really didn't mean anything to me. So use your time, your page limit wisely, and just literally cut and paste. Question number 1 says, what color are your eyes? Put question 1, answer 1, blue. Or, I'm kind of being facetious, but you get what I'm saying. Do not make the government hunt and peck and look for and bury it in your response Don't bury it in a chart or a picture, you know. Yes, add those in there, but don't bury it in there to where we have to look for a response to a specific question. If it's an advantage to the government, highlight it, bold it, do what you can to make sure that that is the attention that you get, that you get the government's attention, because as an advantage to the government, it scores you higher. And it makes our job of writing the technical proposal easier. I can say, we asked for this system to be upgraded in 30 days, and this contractor came in and said, I can have it done in 18 days. I've saved you 12 days. Out of this 12 days, this is how much money you're going to save. Oh, I'm I'm on the panel and I'm writing. Very easy for me to state why this is an advantage and this is the higher rated proposal than proposal B or C or D.
Mm-hmm. What about in that situation where the contractor's reading the RFP and either disagrees with the approach the government's asking for and thinks, oh, here's another solution that actually is better, or feels that maybe from one of their conversations with government knows, no, they actually wanted this, but now this RFP is asking for this other thing. What's a strategy they can consider in that situation?
Good question. Ignore what somebody told you. I can't say that enough. Even if it's usually called incumbentitis. The incumbent is so embedded with the program office and they know, what the customer wants, but what comes out and who's responsible for writing that requirement or the PWS might not be that same person, or it might just not be bled into that document. And so the industry goes, oh, I know that they don't want this red door. They really want a gray door. I'm going to give them a red door because I just spoke to Joe, making up the name, and this is what he wants. Doesn't matter. Always, always, always respond to what's on the four corners of that piece of paper. Don't overthink it. Don't underthink it. Don't listen to hearsay. Now, the other part of your question was, do you always go with what the government wants, or can you offer a different perspective? In the RFQ or RFP, you'll be able to decide whether they're up for innovation or something new or different, or if they've said, hey, for example, a lot of times within CIS, we give the contractors the labor categories. We already know what team works as far as the DevSecOps teams: Scrum Master, developer, architect, engineer, and then we're just asking for your pricing. But there is language in there, especially with the most recent ones, that says if you have a better or different, staffing, please let us know, recommend it. Now, would I go and say, here's the 7 to 10, it's usually 7 to 10 in a team, to take those 7 to 10 and totally disregard them and make up an entire different team? No, I wouldn't do that. But it doesn't hurt to offer some innovation, maybe, something that you believe as a industry would be an advantage. Maybe it's better to have, one tester versus two testers. And then you can explain. Here's another thing too. If you do make changes, explain the benefit. Put some thought behind it. And not only explain the benefit, don't say what you're going to do. Explain how this has been beneficial historically for the company on a different contract. That holds a lot more weight.
One thing we've also seen a lot with new partners is a lot of that innovation can come after awards. So focus the proposal on what the government's asking for. Then during implementation, as you're building that relationship and you're building that trust with the government, I find some of that innovation can really come out of that point. Hey, we're doing this. What if we tried a couple red doors over here in addition to these gray doors over here?
Yeah, that is true. And especially now, I think that industry was going to see a lot more of the word innovation, AI, chatbot, you name it. This administration is really forward leaning when it comes to AI. So I think they're going to be looking for a lot more innovation in programs and requirements that really weren't very innovative, kind of status quo. This is the way we've done it before. it's worked. We're not going to change it. I don't think that's going to be the forward leaning or the path of government period, not just DHS, just government period.
Hmm. So let's get into the so what for the contract for industry. What are some of the, given all this, the current climate we're in, Monica, and then all of the insight you've shared on the evaluation and award process, what are some of the so what's, the strategic takeaways that the biz dev teams at industry can take from this?
Yeah. So one of the things is how most of industry determines whether they're going to bid on something, um, and determine their P-win is on customer intimacy, knowing the customer, even knowing who's managing it. And if you don't have an existing contract, I'll just use CIS for example. If you don't have an existing contract and they've closed the doors for communication, you're like, what do I do now? There's no way to get in the door. And so, a lot of these events that are still going on are highly attended by industry now, and very, very few feds, because they're not allowed to attend them, because, one partner might have some information that another partner shared, and that could be a way of trying to determine what the strategy is and getting a little bit of, of intel. Another thing is, like I said, act like the RFIs are a window to a meeting. If there is an RFI out there, respond to it. And, do your elevator pitch. Your 9 seconds or 90 seconds of, what your company can offer. The government can't have external meetings, but it doesn't mean that they're not going to read your emails. They might not respond to your emails, but it doesn't mean that they're not going to read it. So if there's anything that is upcoming, that you're tracking and the doors have closed, I can't even get a meeting with a customer right now, send them an email. But here's the thing, don't kill them by PowerPoint. I can't tell you how many meetings I've had, and it was like death by PowerPoint. And then I'd have the meeting, and then the customer would read, the PowerPoint. I'm like, no, I know how to read. Can we just let's have a conversation? So act like you're the government, act like you are potentially about to lose your job, your livelihood, you're stressed, and now you're supposed to work productively in this unknown environment. How do you get the attention? How do you get somebody to pay attention to what you're sending? Read what you're sending. I know this is going to sound abnormal, but I tried it before I left, and it worked. I thought it worked. Is a video. So there was the Planks RFI, and I was working on that RFI before I left. And I read every RFI, by the way, that came into OIT. I did. I wanted to learn how they wrote, who was out there, what business, what size, what categories. And so it got to the point where you can only read 100 or 150. And so I asked the contracting officer, I said, hey, can we ask industry to do a video? And they're like, they're not going to do a video. I'm like, can we at least ask? I'm telling you right now, the program office was standing in line waiting for those videos to be sent. Never. You could barely rope them into reading an RFI and getting together and gathering a meeting and evaluating the responses to the RFI. Nobody really, it was not that they wouldn't do it, but it was just, then when I told them we got 2 videos, oh, send me the video, send me the video. It really piqued the attention of the federal government. They wanted to watch the videos. So, you know what? Let's think outside the box.
I bet you everyone watched that, and you can easily embed a quick video, probably even in maybe that unsolicited outreach, knowing there won't be a response. But sure, you can put that right in the body of the email too.
Yeah, we limited them to 2, I think it was 2 minutes.
Sure. Oh yeah, it shouldn't be longer than that anyway.
Yeah. And we didn't ask for like a studio or anything like that. It's not I'm not saying get your 10-year-old out there with a camcorder or your phone, but I'm telling you, if I was industry and I wanted to get a hold of or get the government to pay attention to me, I'd send them a video.
Monica, thank you so much. This has been very insightful. Can you share a bit about your work, how our audience can get in touch with you, how you can help them with their federal government strategy, partnering proposals?
Yeah, absolutely. Most of them can reach me on LinkedIn. I have an active profile. It's the procurementpros.com is my website. You can easily, reach out to me, send me an email. it, comes directly to me. We can set up a meeting. I'm very strategic when it comes to the support that I provide. So if there's a customer that really just wants to know, how do I write my corporate experience to where I can get past phase one? How do I do my pricing? How do I write my technical responses? That is kind of where my sweet spot is kind of advising along those lines of basically how to win a contract.
Excellent.
That's kind of my specialty.
Reach out to Monica at the Procurement Pros or message her on LinkedIn. Monica,
Yeah.
thank you so much for coming on today and sharing the insight of what happens behind the curtain on the evaluation and some really good tactical advice of how to operate in the current climate.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's show, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and connect with Mike Shanley on LinkedIn.